4050. If I could get a quick sound check, mic check from somebody would be wonderful.
Hi, Professor. I can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, welcome to class for today. So today we're going to be talking about the selection process related to your homework and risk management. So we have a full agenda, I believe. So we'll try to get through everything. We'll get through it somehow, but I think we're a little packed. We'll see how it goes. So here's the agenda from our first half hour. We're going to talk about the winning proposal. It's going to be a little mini exercise for you all. And then we're going to discuss a few other items about the selection process. We'll take our break earlier than later, and then we're going to get into our risk management for engineers, if you will. So try to cover risk in about an hour. A topic that's pretty huge topic. So, but we'll do the best we can. So, okay. So any questions before we really get rolling? Take silence is good. Oh, and the last thing we're going to do is talk about the midterm. So I did post a announcement and link on about what to expect in the midterm. So we'll talk about that later in the class. So, all right. So here, let's briefly go through the project process so far. So here's a project starts with an idea, item number 1. And let's just call that person who has an idea the owner. Typically, that's who these people are. They tend to own their projects. They may sell their ideas to others, but you notice in the upper right corner, ideas are worth a penny. Implementing them is worth a million. A good thing to remember. I don't know who stated this, but it's a saying I've heard for a long time. And I've got friends of mine who, hey, Todd, I got this great idea. We're going to make a lot of money on this great idea that we're going to invent this product or this. We really need this in our society. And usually that's about as far as it goes. It's worth a penny. You got to make it happen. So projects are things that do happen. So typically an owner has an idea. They come up with a budget. We haven't talked a lot about this in this class. Is in order to actually do a project, you have to have money. So the owner either has to have this money in their own banking account or have connections, or they have to get funding for their projects. These projects, you can't hire engineers for free, nor would you all, once you get out of college, like to work for free. So somebody has to pay for this. So owner defines a preliminary scope of work. Owner decides on a project delivery method, item 4. We talked about this last week. And here we are at item 5. Owner prepares a document titled Request for Proposal. This was the lesson 2 homework. And in the RFP, there's a section that defines how the owner will select the winning proposal. So you all did this in your homework assignment. And after that, the owner provides RFP to qualified companies with the goal of reviewing. I'm sorry, that's where we're at in the homework. I put this in the wrong spot. My bad. This here should be moved down there to item 6. Owner provides RFP to qualified companies with the goal of receiving proposals from, no, I'm actually, take that back. This was the lesson 2 homework, was to review those RFPs, and now we're reviewing the proposals. I'm screwing myself up. It's a really simple process that I made maybe more complicated than it needs to be. We have an idea. You send out a request for proposal. You get proposals back, and now we're reviewing those proposals according to the selection criteria that was stated in that RFP. So that's what you did for today's homework, and that's what we're going to do right now. Let's skip those last 3 bullet points and get into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to form groups of 3 or 4, and based on the homework as a group, I want you to decide on which company that your group is going to award the proposal to. Who wins the proposal competition, if you will. So we have these 4 companies: Hirsch, RJM, MIG, and David Voles. They were the 4 proposals you reviewed, and you used some evaluation criteria that has some elements of your own opinions and judgment too, but I'm sure you did the best you could. And now you have to choose one of these 4. And who did you choose and why? So I'm going to give you 15 minutes. And so to kind of negotiate and talk with your group. And after that 15 minutes, you will come back and then share with the rest of us who your winning group is and why. What were the biggest winning factors? So I am looking for a consensus group. Like some of you may have said, we're going with MIG. Maybe you have 4 people in your group and each of you picked 4. I want you to try to arrive at 1 and the reason why. Does that make sense? Is 15 minutes too much? Can we get this done in 10 minutes?
I think 10 minutes is good.
You think 10 minutes is good? Okay, let's make it 10 minutes. Okay, so we're going to do 10 minutes. Everybody know what you're going to be doing? I think so. All right, let me form some groups here. There's the breakout rooms. You know what? I don't know if you are all going to share your screen, but just in case, I will enable that, which means I have to stop sharing my screen. It's always kind of weird. Okay, now I need to go back over to allow multiple. Okay, now that's good. Now I can share my screen again. Okay, we're doing breakout rooms. We're going to assign automatically. And let's see. It looks like we can do, well, we'll create 5, right? Well, okay, I'm going to create 5 rooms. It just so happens we have 20 of us here. So that'll be 4 per room exactly for every room. So here we go. That's just for fun's sake. We'll do this the United States voting method. We have, I guess you are all a state and you're all allotted electoral votes. So, but you've decided as a group on who your winning proposer is. And I guess we'll give them a point each since there's 5 groups. So somebody's going to win here. We'll keep it that simple. So room 1, who'd you come up with?
For us, we came up with MIG because their format was really easy to read and their quality references was within the timeline.
Okay. So easy to read and met schedule, sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did that compare with, say, the selection criteria? And it played out in the selection criteria that way for most of in your group as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. How about group 2?
Same as group 1, we chose MIG just because their schedule was pretty good out of all the other 3 firms. They gave you a legend, gave you when the submittals are going to be turned in. They give you an actual month when construction is supposed to finish.
Yep.
And also, they're very organized and had good references and good experience.
Okay. Good. So 2 votes. Well, I guess, we'll see. Group 3, room 3, did you come up with MIG as well or somebody different?
No, we picked RJM.
RJM, okay.
We felt like their proposal looked very up to date and was very organized. We also felt like it had clear ideas, along with, we felt like it showed that they had a lot of experience. And we liked that they showed their license numbers as well, their engineering license. And we felt like their schedule was very well organized as well.
Okay. So you said RJM?
Yes.
Okay, so RJM's got 1 vote, MIG has 2 votes. All right. And all good reasons, schedule, organization, qualifications. I forget, what was the anybody have on the top of your head, what was the selection criteria? The breakdowns, I think there was percentages. I could pull up the spreadsheet, but I won't.
Yes.
It was go ahead.
You had had for the approach was 40%.
Approach was
No,
40%?
sorry.
Yeah, schedule was
the
10, approach was 40.
Yeah, it was 40%.
Yeah.
Schedule was,
Okay.
training was 25%.
Training 25. And cost was I think cost was on there, but it was
And then
pretty
you had the cost.
yeah. But we didn't include it.
Yeah.
But it was low
Right.
anyhow. Okay. Very good. All right. So 2 for MIG, 1 for RJM, and group 4. What's your thoughts?
We chose RJM
RJM. Okay, that ties
for a
it up.
couple reasons. They like they mentioned before, they had the license numbers. That's one. Two, they had a lot of experience. Their PMs, PEs, owners had a lot of good resume that they showed, or even their experience was really good. The RFP included even sweeping notes, change order notes. They even mentioned the sweepy and the RFIs, that they're gonna respond to all RFIs, submit to RFIs, and their schedule. They weren't the shortest, but they weren't the longest. They were the average, and as we thought that's the best, because every time you have a tight schedule and you need to request for more days, that's kind of like a long process. Instead, you can just go with an average schedule, and if you finish shorter a bit earlier, that's way better. And then if you request for just a couple more days, that's good too.
Yeah, that's a very true statement. If you promise a schedule and finish ahead of schedule, that's always smiled upon. If you set a schedule and you're behind schedule, that's usually frowned upon. If you meet schedule, that's always good. So,
yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, I didn't plan it this way, but we got a MIG for 2, RJM for 2. Let's see if group 5 breaks the tie or introduces somebody new. Group 5.
All right, so for us, it was between RJM and MIG as well.
Okay.
Decided to go with RJM because they're
Yum.
both of them had super qualified teams, but for our choosing, it was mostly based on the schedule. RJM finished the project 4 months earlier than MIG would have, so that was one of the big factors in choosing RJM.
Okay. Was there any discuss? So RJM's our winner. We're gonna, based on on our democratic process here, we've decided on RJM. And but was there any distant, or any, I shouldn't say distant, was there any discussions about, say, Hirsch and Associates and David Voles? Where did they fall short, or were they in the conversation in any of the groups as a close second or anything along those lines?
Hirsch was a close second for us. They only fell short because on their reference, their reference go back all the way back into 2005, and the RFP stated that the reference should stay within like 5 years back only.
Ah, good observation. Yeah. Okay. Although I'm not sure what was the date of the RFP, unless the RFP is an old document itself. I'm not sure.
I think it was like 2016, 17.
Okay, so that
I
would
think
put them
17, 18.
Okay, and they're not within the 5 years requested.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you would have dinged them on that. You're like, hey, you did not. And why would you ding them on that? Simply because either they don't have relevant current experience, or they're not following instructions. Probably one or the other, or both. Any other thoughts on any other groups consider David Voles or Hirsch?
Some of them didn't follow what the proposer wanted. Like for task 3 had certain submittal percentages, like 30, 60, 95, but one had 30, 60, 90. So it just didn't follow them specifically.
Now, did they state in there that they would follow the 30, 60, 90, or we will follow if you want us to, but we recommend it this way, or did it say anything along those lines?
Oh, I'm not sure. I didn't look in depth in what.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's always an interesting question, because it's a time on a proposal where it's okay to say, hey, this is what you requested. We think you should do. Sometimes that could be seen as a positive. you're suggesting we do that. I've done that in proposals before, where it's like you're asking the schedule to be done by December 31st of this year, and I'm here to tell you, if you want a little bit better of a quality of a project, or if you want a realistic schedule, maybe it actually can't be done until so-and-so date, or whatever it could be, quality of products, or the way they're going to approach their, like in this case, the 30-60-90, or maybe they feel it's better for this project to do it a little bit differently. So it's always interesting how a company will propose that. It's always treading on, okay, are you being seen as not following the direction of the request for proposal? Or sometimes I've seen it as, hey, they're offering some keen insight, which means they've actually looked into this more than, say, the other firms have, and they understand the project, and they've raised some issues that we didn't even see when we wrote the request for proposal. And that actually might get me some points in their attention to detail and their quality focus. So always something to think about. Any other just general thoughts on these proposals that you all might have?
I just wanted to share something about the DVD. The only thing that, like I said, was their schedule. They had an 8-month schedule. MIG had an 18-month schedule, and then RJM had 13. And that was like a big difference from 8 to 18. So I just kind of felt like DVD were just like maybe pushing it with their schedule.
Okay.
Like 8 months, maybe like too short. Yeah, maybe 8 months maybe too short. Too short, yeah. Yes. And then
so you might
that's the only thing
get it done, but it might not be. They might not really understand what they're getting themselves into. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So that's always the thing with winning proposal. Now the way you go about, if you're on the owner side of this, which you've all been asked to do for your homework, it's an interesting spot, because now you're at a position where, let's just say, for instance, you really liked RJM. They were our winner, right? Yeah, RJM was our winner. But let's just say, for instance, that MIG or I'm not picking on David Vols or Hirsch. Some of the others were like, well, I really liked what we saw with Hirsch and Associates or RGM. If you've allotted yourself, you could go a strict selection criteria, and some agencies will do this, where we're just going purely off of that. Now, you might not want to fully resolve those ratings. You might want to do a preliminary, and you might want to do interviews. You might want to actually have an interview with RJM, have an interview with MIG, ask them about that schedule, clarify this, and then you can reevaluate and change those numbers if it's appropriate to do so, and make sure you get the right. So it's really, once you get that proposal, it's sort of a negotiation time with everybody involved, and you might not. Most owners don't let go of any of those proposals until they've kind of gone through the interview process to some degree. I mean, some agencies, maybe they won't allow that. I know Southern California Edison, we recently went through, I think I shared a little bit of this with you already, where we received proposals from about 12 different companies to provide us full bore engineering services, from electrical engineering to geotechnical engineering to structural engineering to civil engineering. Everything. And so we had to go through all these different aspects. We had an extremely complicated selection criteria. I mean, the selection criteria you have here is simple compared to, we had not to say it was hard, but we probably had at least 12 categories, and it was 12 categories per discipline. So like for my group being geotechnical, we had 12 categories, and then we had a particular weight to the geotechnical score. So the electrical engineers had more weight because they do more of the bulk of the work than, say, the others. And we had to kind of try to converge all this together to make our selection. Now, we had things in there that were called, what's the right term here? Like fatal flaws. It's like if or just things that we will not even accept this company because they don't meet baseline qualifications or baseline things. And if that was the case, it doesn't matter if one of the firms was great in every other category, but if they didn't meet the baseline qualifications, then they would be out. So that was, I don't remember if that was written in our selection criteria or not. Long story short, it took us 2 years to get through from when we received proposals to when we recently awarded those, like literally just a month or two ago. It took us 2 years to get to that point of going back and forth internally, doing interviews. Now, most projects, this is for on-call services, most projects are going to have a much faster timeline and wouldn't need that sort of length, and you wouldn't be allotted that sort of time either. So, okay, let me close that down. And that's proposals. Okay, so a few other things to be aware of for the selection process is these are some terms. Notice inviting bid. You might get sent out we're inviting a bid. It would be instead of a request for proposal, you would get an NIB, and as the title suggests, this is only for low bid only. So if you're doing this, the scope of work is already set. You're agreeing to the scope of work. You're just giving a bid. So that's a notice inviting bid. Now, that said, it won't necessarily be the document you would submit back would say, here's our final number. There might be other things in forms and applications. And one thing I trimmed out of, if you looked at the pre-reads for the midterm exam, I trimmed out a whole bunch of forms that were in there, tacked on to the end, that normally when you submit proposals, you're asked to provide. It's like going to visit the doctor, they have you fill out 50 million forms before you can actually go see the doctor. So much same thing with submitting a proposal, a whole bunch of forms to fill out. Request for qualification, something we haven't talked about yet so much. It's typically for a qualification-based selection or to weed out someone or to weed out companies that really aren't qualified to be proposing. But again, normally for QBS, and we're just looking to get companies into the system so that when we do send proposals out, we know you're already qualified and we don't have to mess around with companies trying to prove to us that they're qualified after the fact. So, okay. Like I said, we'll take our break early and then we'll dive in. Before we take a break, any questions on the selection process? Quick RFPs from somebody. Proposals. Wonderful.
Are we after the break? Are we gonna discuss this? Because I had a question.
Thank you so much. So again, welcome to class for today. So today we're gonna go for it now. I'd rather stick to the second half being about risk.
I was just wondering if I'm an owner and then I have a lot of proposals. What's more important to look at? That was one of my questions in this time. Is it more important to look at
try to get through everything?
The cost. Or
we'll get through it somehow, but I think we're a little packed.
Oh,
if you're an owner and you're trying to get a lot of proposals,
like if I'm doing the selection process. So like let's say between now RGM and MGI for MIT, for example. One has like a few other items. If I'm looking at costly wise or like timely wise.
Earlier than later,
which one is more important as an owner to look at the time, like the schedule that they're going to take them to finish the project, or how much it's going to cost?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know that there's a simple answer to it. That's a pretty huge topic. The complicated answer is it depends on the project. Or the simple answer to a complicated question is it really depends on what type of project you're doing. If it's a very cut and dry, you got really good drawings, you might weigh that more heavily towards the cost. Talk about the midterm. If it's a complicated project, and you really need qualified, qualification-based selection, so we're in the best value. If we're not doing 100% QBS or 100% low bid, we're always in that best value arena of selection process. And then it's like, where do you put those weights? And there's going to be stuff all over the place. From Edison, we tend to run about 50-50. On technical ability and about 50% on cost. They may sell their I think in this proposals you reviewed, you saw these were a lot higher on qualifications in the upper right and less on ideas the cost, are worth a penny. Which I think if you ask most engineers who practice, I would tend to think that most engineers are going to value that a heavier weight on the on sort of the process and the quality and the
Todd,
the things that you all discussed made your decision on this winning process. The engineers are going to be a little bit more lenient on cost. I think if you go ask construction personnel, they might be like, cost is what really matters. Although I think the construction folks might be the ones that get burned or could get burned most by someone lowballing.
Projects
we
are
came in with
things
a
that do
lowball
happen.
cost,
So
and
typically
now
the
all of a
owner
sudden
has
they're
a
finding
idea, they
loopholes
come
in the
up with
contract.
a budget.
And
We haven't talked a lot about this.
Yeah, that's no fun. Costs get out of control.
In order to actually do a project, you have to have
like
money.
anything.
So
this has to do with relationships. You go back to these companies. Hopefully, if you're ever trying a brand new company, like you were the city of El Monte, and you've worked with RJM in the past, and you worked with Hirsch in the past, you know that RJM had a one or two okay projects. I'm making this up. I'm not picking on these companies at all. I don't know their history. Hirsch, just did fabulous work for you in the past, but maybe their price was a little bit higher than RJM. You might want to stick with the tried and true. If you really had great experience with the company, so that those past relationships do matter, and those will matter for you as an engineer. So how your homework assignment? What was the quality of engineering you did on the past project will certainly help you get that next project. So that's a long-winded answer. Hopefully that kind of answer your question. Again, it's going to be up to the each owner to make that call. But relationships go a long way.
To qualified companies with the goal of
Thank you, Professor.
receiving proposals from. No, I'm actually take that back.
Anything else?
This was the lesson 2 homework was to
request for. We'll talk just a little bit more of this at the very end.
Now we're reviewing the proposals,
at least relating to the midterm.
Myself up. It's a really simple process that I made maybe more complicated than it needs to be. We have an idea.
Okay, with that, we're almost at break time anyhow, so
you get proposals
maybe a little bit sooner. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll really focus the end of the class on
according to
risk.
the selection criteria that was stated in that RFP. So that's what you did for today's homework, and that's what we're going to do right now. Let's skip those last 3 bullet points and get into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to form groups of 3 or 4.
Welcome back from break. Okay, so here's some thoughts I have on risk management. Everything you do is a risk. Every decision made by a company is a risk. Risk brings reward or loss. Most risks are calculated in our minds with little or no thought. Day to day, we're always doing that. And other risks, we need to actually put some thought and numbers, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, but I do want you to all get thinking about risk, because that first point there, everything you do is risk, is very true. I just don't think we realize it. So maybe to help you get to realize that, we've got a mini exercise again. I think we'll go a little bit quicker on this one just to keep it shorter. I think let's just say 8 minutes. So again, we're going to do some quick breakout rooms. And what I want you to talk about is, what is one of the biggest risks you have taken in life, and why did you take that risk is the question. So each room, just nominate a person who you feel like had the, maybe you're not going to have time to talk about everybody's personal risk. If someone's just dying to share, then we'll go with that one. And just have one person just share their risk to the rest of the group. So any questions? I will take silence as good. Let me do a quick sound check. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. All good. All right. So we'll do 8-minute breakout rooms, and then we will reconvene. All right. Let's see, breakout rooms. You know what? I'm just going to leave you in the same rooms that you had before. So ready? It's just easier that way. Each room and see what you all took for your biggest risks in life. Room number 1, what do you got?
For me, what I could have thought of was Six Flags. I went on this drop tower. It was called the Lex Luthor Drop of Doom. It was like around like 400 feet tall and like a free fall drop. I risked my life, but the probability was kind of low for that. But I did risk my entire sanity. So I guess that was the one that was a big factor. But I didn't really like it, but it was doable. It wasn't that fun because it kept going up really slowly, and then they would say that they would count down from like 3 to 1, but then they would actually drop at 2. So you had no idea when it was going to fall. And yeah.
But it wasn't that fun. So you were expecting more out of it than what you got.
Yeah. Yeah. I would prefer to like ride other different roller coasters. Not really a fan of like a drop tower.
Yeah. So the reason why you did it was why specifically though?
I just wanted to get the experience of it, and also my friends were doing it, so a little bit of peer pressure from that end too.
Fair enough. Sometimes that is we take risks just because I guess the reason there is peer pressure. That does happen too. So okay, good example. Yeah, that's one of those. Just like our picture here, jumping into the. Let's jump off this cliff into the water. Let's go up on the Lex Luthor Free Fall Doom ride. I haven't heard of that one. Of course, I haven't been to Six Flags in a while. So, all right. Well, thanks for sharing that. How about room number 2?
So I didn't discuss this with my group. I was thinking about it because we didn't have anything in mind at the moment. But one of the risks I've experienced with my family is that my mom, she's a gardener, so she has a lot of equipment, and sometimes she leaves it outside.
Yeah,
in the front yard, which is pretty scary considering that one time our car was the back of the window was broken. Like someone broke it. We don't know what happened. We just woke up one morning. So I think that's a big risk my mom is willing to take.
Yeah,
leaving all her equipment outside.
Is it like visible? Like,
some equipment is.
Yeah.
Some is kind of hidden in the truck, but still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're getting into a whole line of just physical security, and that's a big deal in any home. For your home example there, or even a company that owns tools or whatever, or just even any company, just literally being able prevent, or there is no such thing as prevention, but deter, crimes or theft or other things. And it's so not doing something. You're interesting how you pitch the risk is it's almost not doing something. Just say I'm going to leave my garden hoe out or my rake out. Someone may take that rake and use it to break into my vehicle. So I'm taking a risk by not doing anything, as opposed to let me be proactive and put the rake in the garage or the shed and put a lock over it so that I can at least, mitigate that risk a little bit. So, yeah, okay, good example. Room number 3.
Yeah, so for our room, we all said that we all drive, and we all thought of that as a risk. We also talked about flying.
Yep.
Me personally, I fly down whenever I go to school because I live in Northern California, so I fly quite a bit. Yeah. It's not a long flight, but, and for the reason we take this risk is because transportation, we can't walk everywhere. You just, especially like in LA, you'd be stuck walking for forever, or, it's just not reasonable. You'd be out walking for 3 hours to get to class, and then you from your apartment, and then you walk 3 hours back.
To walk too.
Yeah, and you're taking risk walking too. And then it just impractical.
Yeah. Well, good. Another great example, a huge risk in any travel is risk.
Yeah.
Of course, you could always argue that not traveling is risking, because if you're not traveling, you're just sitting there and you're getting out of shape. So maybe it's good for us to travel to some degree. But yeah, you mentioned a couple things there that are kind of interesting. So is your flight that you take, is it a large plane or a smaller plane?
It's a larger plane.
Okay.
It's a Boeing 737.
Okay. So a big plane, you're going to face different risks. It always seems like the little charter planes. So and so died in a charter. We all know Kobe died in was a helicopter. I can't remember. Helicopter. So the helicopters and the little planes tend to be a bigger. I don't have the stats. I'm just basing off of what I hear. Those tend to be a much higher risk than flying in your Boeing 727 or 717, whatever number it is. Mm-hmm. Larger chartered, airline flights are actually, in the scale of risk, they always say it's much more riskier to drive, and I can believe that, than it is to take a flight. Although our bodies and those of us just with fears may be like, I would never fly because not me. I have no problem with flying. But some of us might be scared of flying for whatever reasons, but statistically it's a much better bet. So who knows? But you're but then it's not quite as easy as saying flying versus driving. What's the risk of flying? Because you need to define flying. Are you flying a large jet or are you flying a helicopter? There's different risks involved with those two scenarios. So, all right, are we in room 4, I think?
Yeah. So the biggest risk I've ever taken was probably this Thanksgiving. So I decided to go visit my family up north during the pandemic, and we were safe about it. We all got tested before, and then we came back. And when I came back, I got tested again, and turns out I caught COVID. I had COVID during finals week, and it was terrible. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest risks I've taken.
There's a lot of things around COVID to do with risk. That's a huge topic there. And risk from doing, risk from not doing. And there was a reward to seeing your family during that you were willing to risk the COVID and obviously be as careful as you could. But it's like, how long do we wait? The whole big question for a lot of COVID is how long do we wait before, especially those of us with, we have older family. It's like, are we supposed to wait for 5 years? I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. My family might not be there in 5 years or 2 years or 1 year. It might be worth the risk to go see them because I might not ever see them again. Those are the thoughts that I know we're hitting on some hard life strings there, but those are the thoughts that can go through our minds and looking in pros and cons of a lot of risks. So yeah, COVID's deep water. So thanks for sharing that. Room 5.
Is that us? I think that was us.
That'd be Anthony, Justin, and Ryan. Yep.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger risks I've taken is moving out of my parents because there's no going back. Just got to push through and just start something new.
Yeah. Definitely a risk. Stepping away from what you've known your whole life, the safety and security of your parents and their home and all that. And no doubt something that everybody has to go through it.
5 years running, and so far, not too shabby.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah. So 5 years ago for you. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Well, that's a biggie. I learned that one age 18. I joined the Army National Guard, so I remember graduating high school, and 2 weeks after I graduated, I was on the bus to Minneapolis, flying to South Carolina for basic training.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. Now I was able to, after 4 or 5 months, I came back and was able to visit after I went in, 200 pounds and came out 160.
Nice.
So, yeah, they'll whoop you into shape. Anyhow, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, 5 years on your own and a whole lifetime ahead of you. So I'm sure there's more risks. There's a lot more risks for each of us to come. So it's not just all about our personal life risks. Obviously, we'll transition into what we're talking about here from project risks and even company risks or personal risks you may make for a company, risks you're going to make in your careers. So what the slant's going to be as we trudge through this is going to be our risks that we're looking at from an engineering perspective or a project perspective, or I'm probably going to take a little bit more of a company perspective on this because I work for Southern California Edison. So I'm going to give you an example that you all did in your homework assignment to kind of look at it from that perspective. How do we calculate this risk? If we're just kind of going to go, okay, I have an uneasy feeling about flying versus walking or taking a car, which should I choose? If you're going to make a logical decision as a company, it probably shouldn't be based off of your personal feelings or fears. It should be based off of the best available data that you have. And if you want to come out and make good decisions, that's the best way to go. So that's our idea as we go forward. Let me get this thing to move to the next slide. There we go. So there are two components of risk: probability and cost, or cost and probability. Should have had those in the other order. I guess it doesn't matter. There's two components: cost and probability. So cost, how much does it cost? Or how much is the reward? There's always, in both of these, you have to think of the converse. So there's the cost, what's the reward? What will I gain or what will I lose? Probability, what's the chances of this happening? What's the possibility of the good thing happening? What's the possibility of the bad thing happening? Those are the ways, those are the components. That's the way to look at risk. We're going to look at some processes. So risk is, if you're going to do a risk analysis, what do we want to do as engineers here? We want to jump right down to mitigation. Okay, we're going to solve this problem because that's what we do as engineers. We like to solve problems. You need to kind of take a little bit of a step back when you're doing a risk analysis in the risk process, and you need to start with the identification. Got to start with, what is the risk? So if you were going to walk, or I need to get to school, what are the risks that could be there? Well, I might get hit by a car. The plane could be a physical problem there, whatever it could be. You want to identify those, and that's what we did in our homework assignment, was to go through, identify, and evaluate. We didn't touch too much on the allocation and mitigation. All right, so let's talk about those first steps, risk identification. We're going to fly through this. Probably the biggest thing you'll do in any sort of risk management is those first steps. If you don't do a good job of identifying risks, you can have data and stats and mitigate, but if you didn't do a very good job of identifying what the risks are, then you're probably not going to, have a very effective analysis. So what does that mean? You should consult subject matter experts. You should look at prior experience. Brainstorming is a good place to start, but it's not a good place to finish. But brainstorming is very useful, and that's what you did on your homework assignment. It can be like, well, what are the problems with this exploding structure? Well, it might have chunks flying here. It might have chunks flying there. Once you've kind of gone through that, then it's probably a good idea to consult those subject matter experts. And what have you learned from experience? Okay, so let's jump right into our homework here, and let's look at this vault risk identification. So I'm not saying I'm right with this, although I did work on the design of Southern California Edison system for restraining these covers and mitigating this. So I guess that makes me kind of an expert, doesn't it? But that's not to say that we looked at these very things. We took a little bit different approach to it in some ways, and other ways not. But anyhow, here's the thing just off the top of my head. What are some risks that you could run into? If you're just going to look at, okay, we know we have exploding manhole covers. We see evidence of it here. It made the news. We don't want this to happen again. There's clearly, risks here that if these are going to keep exploding, what can we do? Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind, if you were to skip the whole identification process and jump down to the mitigation or the management, you would want to stop the explosion. And certainly we've thought about that, and the whole industry's thought about that. Easier said than done is what the answer to that question turns into. So it turns out that what we're trying to do is more like a seat belt is in a car. We know cars are going to get into an accident at some point, or we hope they don't. We're going to try everything we can do not to have cars get into accidents on freeways. But if they do get into an accident, let's at least put a seat belt in the car, and let's have people buckle up, because that will save lives. So we'll approach that later, but let's just assume that we can't stop the gas from accumulating in these vaults. That's really the main reason why they do explode, is heavier than air gases, or sometimes even lighter than air gases, do build up. I didn't tell you this in the homework assignment. It's not really critical. Really, I'm not even concerned with what your identified list is, as long as you came up with a list is what I was looking for. Here's a list I came up with, as assuming that we can't stop the explosion from happening. What are the issues that we're facing? Well, we got flying debris causing damage to property. We have flying debris causing injury to people. We have flying debris causing death to people. So a lot on the flying debris. Well, maybe we have fire or smoke that can do all those same things. And then there could be other risks. We could have just company reputation, power outage risk that causes losses. And there's probably a lot of things that you could come up with here. Here's just some things that I came up with off the top of my head. Okay, so now that you've identified some risks, and you would want to do that. If you were really doing a risk analysis, you'd want to do that really well. And it might be one of those things where you'd go back and forth. You'd identify, evaluate, realize that, okay, we got better data, so on and so forth. Depends on where you're at in the phase of the risk analysis. So if you're going to do an evaluation, again, we're going to jump into those components, probability and cost. That's what we want to identify. And you can look at probability and cost from a couple different perspectives. We're going to look at both in your homework. You looked at this from a qualitative way, non-numerical. I didn't ask you to run any numbers, but you could easily look at this from a quantitative way. What is probability? What is cost? Cost is going to be in whatever currency you're using. We're not using Bitcoin. We're using dollars. Or if you're in Europe, you could be using euros or wherever you're at. So what's the probability chances of this? We'll look at an example later. So finding data to support the evaluation can be difficult, inaccurate, or time consuming. How true? So if you're going to look at you're going to be traveling and you're going to be, what's the data for commercial airlines to cause injury to passengers or to crash? I can tell you it's extremely low. In cars, it's not even, I don't even think they're in the same ballpark. Traveling by cars, based on the data, is far more dangerous or far larger risk. And how do I know that? Because we know that the probability of car accident, you could go find stats on this and we'll answer that question for you. Those are actually actually finding data for that example is probably quite easy. I probably should have had you do a risk analysis of that, because I think the data is really easy to find. But I forced you through this process to do a qualitative one and just to get you to scratch your head and think a little bit. So how the risks were identified is critical to success. We said that already. All right. Okay, so how do we measure risk? Quantitative versus qualitative. And the quantitative is going to be a simple equation here. Could ask a test question on that. Risk equals probability times cost. You got the equation. I know you're all engineering students. This is the simplest engineering equation you'll ever encounter. So qualitative, technically it's calculated, but it's when you look at the risk equals probability times cost, we're going to be looking at a matrix like you did on your homework assignment. You're going to have one side of the axis is cost and the other side is probability. And if you follow the linear line from lower left to upper right, you're going to increase in risk. Pretty simple and straightforward. So let's look at our LADWP example. I went through and did a qualitative risk evaluation and of the exploding vaults. I said, okay, let's look at each of these categories and let's use this severity scale of very low, low, medium, high, very high. You could do any severity scale you wanted to. You could do low, medium, high. If you were just really wanted something general, you can use this 5-point scale. It's like a ranking system. Do you want the 5-star system, or do you want to rank on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest? Where do you want to put how do you want to do this? And there's some difficulties with doing this qualitatively versus actually doing it quantitatively, which I think you'll see here in just a second. Okay, so I'm not going to go through, but you can see here's the scores that I put on the probability and cost for each of the risks as described. And the next step, like I said, here's the box that we want to fill out. And so we're going to be interested in things. We're not going to be interested in stuff down here. We might have brainstormed some things down in maybe this area down here, but something falls. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. If something falls into this lower area of low risk, essentially, you might have done the analysis and it's there, but you're really interested in the high risk. Okay, so I went through and here's my probabilities and costs. I just did this by brainstorming. I don't have any data yet or even later. We do have some data. I can tell you this is a prop for this example I gave you. Data, oh my goodness, extremely difficult to come by. And I've made contact with plenty of the agencies nationwide. And this is actually not even a nation, it's a worldwide thing. It's not none of these things are high probability. So you shouldn't go out by an electric vault or manhole and be like, oh, this thing's going to blow up any second. They're very extremely rare, but they do happen. And when they do happen, they make the news. So anyhow, getting this data was difficult is my point. Taking all this probability and cost that I just took estimates at is, in some ways it's difficult, but some of them are obvious. Flying debris causing fatality to people. We know that's going to be an extremely high cost. The loss of life or injury to people for any company that has that as a risk, those are always high or very high, and or even off the charts. I mean, how do you define loss of life? That's just one of those things that's hard to define. So some things are going to be very low, like maybe the cost of a reputation. It could be very high. I don't know. That's that one. Maybe that's a tricky one. Power outages is going to be a pretty low cost. LADWP power companies, we're going through power outages all the time. It's a redundant system. They're going to get the power back on after something like this in some amount of time. So not that big of a deal. And everywhere in between. So from plotting these, obviously it's as simple as going, okay, risk number one, we have a probability, which is over here of medium. And so I'm in this row, and then we have a cost of low, which is right there. It's going to put me in that quadrant. And then you just do the same thing for everyone. And you see which ones are low over here and which ones are higher over here. So we're looking if you draw a line that's kind of or perpendicular to the purple line, you're going to see that our two highest risks are 2 and 3, which are injury to nearby people or fatalities. Those are the big risks. And there's some additional risk with 5 and 6 and 8. Again, injury to people, and I guess maybe the power outage, or no, not the power outage. 8. What's 8? 6. I'm sorry. 8. Oh, it was 8. Yeah, getting ahead of myself. Property damage, yeah, that's somewhat of an issue, but property can always be fixed. And when we're looking at this, maybe we destroy a car. Okay, that's not cool. Nobody wants a car broken windshield. Is it going to cost LADWP money to fix that car? Absolutely. Person's going to get brand new, probably going to get at minimum, get a brand new windshield and completely repaired car out of it. Probably got more than that. Maybe they even just bought that individual a new car. Who knows? Some of you are like, I got an old beater car. I should go park them by exploding by vaults when I go off to class. So I'm gonna maybe it'll explode and land on my car and I can get a brand new car out of it. Very low chance of that happening. So don't count on that. So all right. So that's any questions on this risk matrix and how this a qualitative analysis works, evaluation, I should say. I see no. We are in evaluation, are we not? I always forget never know. I could ask a test question on this, but I don't like getting too bogged down. Yeah, we are in risk evaluation. All right. It is good to know what's identification, what's part of the evaluation, what's part of the, let's go back to there just to get everybody up to speed or back on track. I always like to go back to the big picture. It's always good to keep that big picture in mind. Identification, evaluation, allocation, mitigation. So we just did the evaluation. now that we know what we basically determined what we want to focus on. We want to focus on those 2 or 3 items. That's what the evaluation told us. Now we want to look at the allocation. Who is in the best position to handle this risk and who should be responsible for it? So that would be a relatively easy question. Let me jump back to my slide here before I get rambling on too much. I think I got my screen animation. I'm gonna have to remove that. It's making it go slow. Oh, we didn't talk about, before we do that, let's talk about our quantitative risk. So what I've done here is based on no real stats. If I did know the stats, I wouldn't share them with you. But let's just say that I actually have some stats here and some real numbers. This is how you would do a quantitative risk. So you would, instead of putting in those low highs and medium highs, you would start to put in, well, what is the probability of that causing damage to nearby property? Maybe it's higher than 1 in 5. You saw in that video that it damaged the windshield of that car, certainly damaged the pavement and the sidewalk. So maybe if there is, now not all explosions are going to be that violent. That was one of the best I've seen. That's why I put it in this assignment as the video. That was a good one, or a bad one, depends how you want to look at that. But let's just say if you looked at all the events, you would have a probability per event of it causing damage to nearby property. And there's going to be a lot of variables with that. Are you in a densely populated area? Are you out in the middle of the desert? Where are you? How close do people normally park their vehicles? If you're in the middle of a dirt field, which we do have vaults in the middle of dirt fields, and something happens, it, move some dirt around. It's no big deal. It wouldn't cause any damage. If you're in the middle of where this one happened, in the middle of Los Angeles, LADWP, it's probably going to be a higher probability. So even these numbers have baked in analysis that you may not even see. What's the cost of that? Well, maybe we had to replace 1 new car or 2 new cars. Well, that's going to be $50,000. And what is risk? Probability times cost. Multiply those 2 and you get $10,000. 50,000 times 1/5 equals 10,000. It's that simple. You would do the same thing for every category. So the big ticket items, obviously, don't ask me what the cost of a human life is. That is a difficult question. I think, how do you answer that question? Although I will tell you that companies probably do, especially insurance companies. Think of a life insurance company. That's what they're looking at. What is the cost of, this might be a little bit different than an insurance company. This is like an accidental, fatality in that way. Is it $50 million? Who knows? Is it 5 million? Is it even more or less? It's a really tough thing to define, but you have to think of something, and it's going to be a very high number. Okay, other things before I get too crazy into people dying everywhere. Fire damage, all these have numbers, and you can see at the end of the day, we're going to get the highest risk, somewhat similar to what we had over here. Our highest risk here was number 3. Let's see if it's the same. Highest risk number 3, $500,000 per event. Now, one thing that was interesting, we had 3 was by far, then we had 2 was the next highest risk. And let's see, 2 is the next highest risk. I was actually consistent, 100,000. But they're really, it's like the boxes over on the qualitative don't do it justice. 500,000, $500,000 is way more than 100,000. And then you look at some of these little 1,000s and 3,000s. They're not a big deal. They're in the very low category, but they're not even. I would need 500,000. I'll take that back. 500 of these reputations to happen before I would be equivalent to this risk. So sometimes the qualitative just doesn't do it justice than if you actually have real life data and you can run a risk analysis. At the end of the day, we've identified this. We've put a number on this. We said, okay, we have a risk of 719,000, and now that's not quite the end of the story. We've just said if an event happens, this is what the risk would be. Well, what are the chances of an event happening? If you could, figure that out. And again, here's a non-real number, 1 in 25,000 that a underground vault will have an explosion each year. And let's just say you need to know how many vaults you have in your system. We know that LADWP, they know the number of vaults they have in their system. I don't know what that is, but let's just say it's 100,000. Now we know that if you just simply multiply those, they would have 4 events per year in their system, and you would multiply that. And now we know we have about $3 million in risk costs, if you will, or risk that they will face. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean to just someone thinking about that? So this would be, if you actually did nothing as LADWP, you should expect to pay out $3 million per year for costs related to manhole or vault explosions. So you better set that money aside, knowing that it's going to probably happen unless you do something about it. Does that make sense? Any questions on any of that? Some of this is just how you approach it. Not difficult stuff. Okay, let's keep moving forward. Risk allocation. If you've gone through that and you didn't figure out who was doing what, risk allocation is all about figuring out, and we've looked at one very specific thing. Otherwise, this gets so abstract and it's like hard to think about. Risk, you can look at this from an insurance perspective. You can look at it at a lot of different perspectives. Once you've kind of honed in on, hey, here's the real problem, who's best? The way an allocation works is you need to look at who's the best party that can manage that risk. In this case, it's easy. It's LADWP. They need to manage this risk. Now, maybe the city could say, well, we're gonna we're gonna put some things in place. You can't put vaults near parking areas, or there could be things that come out of that. Who knows? If you looked at a project that you were working on as an engineering project, maybe your risk is construction. You're working on a high rise, and the risk is workers could fall off the high rise. Who is the best party to handle that risk? It's obviously the builder, the contractor that's actually scaling the buildings needs to make sure that their workers are clipping on with harnesses. They are best to manage that risk. Things like that. Things to think about. What are the benefits of avoiding it? And if you really get into complex situations, you can look at these issues where there might be more than one party managing the risk. So again, without getting into specific examples, it gets a little bit tricky to try to answer some of the questions here of who manages it, or who it's allocated to, which is who will be managing. All right, how are we doing on time? 2:00. So I have a little story with this one. I think I'm going to forego it. We don't have any golfers in this group, so not too many of you will find this amusing. But let's just think of the sign here. Just putting up a sign might be a form of risk management here. This golf course decided that a lot of golfers were hitting people with their golf balls, and we're going to put up a sign, and that should mitigate our risk. Well, probably not. But people probably still going to get hit by golf balls and break vehicles, windshields, and so on and so forth. All right, let's jump into risk mitigation. So there's a few things you can do with risk mitigation. Once you know what your risks are, you know who's responsible for it. LADWP, we can avoid the risk, we can accept the risk, or we can control the risk. So avoiding the risk is, if you want to fly, or you want to travel, or you want to avoid the COVID risk, you just don't go visiting anybody. But be aware that, and I threw this in there because I think it applies to risk. Newton's third law of motion: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. If you avoid risk, you might actually be incurring a different risk. Just be aware of that. By just not doing anything, we're not flying. I refuse to fly. I'm not gonna fly. I'm not gonna drive. Well, you might get so secluded from society that you go mentally crazy. We don't want that either. So maybe it's a good idea to take on a little bit of risk from time to time and get out and get in your cars and go out to the park and see some things. You can accept the risk. Okay, I'm going to fly. I accept that there is a 1 in 2 million chance that this plane will crash. I am going to accept that one. I don't know if that's the number. I'm going to accept it as is. I'm not going to do anything in addition to what the airlines are doing for me. And not that I could anyhow, but I accept that things could happen. I'm just accepting the risk. Or if it's in your ability, if you're the entity that actually, going back up one slide again, 2 slides. If you've been allocated this risk and you have ability to control it, and there's ways you can do something, you can take measures to reduce that risk. You can try training, there's compliance, you can buy insurance. I'm gonna buy some life insurance so that if the plane does crash, then hey, somebody in my family has life insurance on me. Great. Engineers, one of our biggest ways for getting back to projects in engineering we do to manage or mitigate risk is to take out, to have a contract. Believe it or not, contracts are a great way of managing risk. It's simply saying who's doing what, and we'll get the language right. And we're going to spend forever in this class going through the contracts and talking about that. Public relations, quality assurance, quality control. You're getting bad quality from vendors. How can you avoid risk of bad products? You can employ people, inspectors, to do quality assurance and quality control. A big deal there. So lots of things you can do. I gave you just a few ideas, but these are the 3 main areas of mitigation. Is avoidance a risk mitigation? Sure. Are you doing anything? Nope. Or you're just not going to do it. You're just not even participating. You all took a risk by taking this class in summer. You're losing out on your summer, and you're spending forever reading all these contracts that I'm giving you. Why did I sign up for this class? Oh my goodness. But there's a reward. You're going to get to graduate after the summer's over, or you won't have to do it during the fall, or whatever your reasons are. So you could have avoided the risk of getting a bad grade altogether. You could have just not went to school. There's a risk that you all took. You all decided to get a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Cal Poly Pomona, and that's going to mean a lot of work and effort and blood, sweat, and tears. But here you are. You decided, no, I'm going to accept that risk, and maybe I'll accept and control it. All right, so this is just a fancy slide showing more of what I just said. Insurance is a great way to mitigate your risk. Signs, again, preventative. You can go as far as trying to turn things into law. That's where you're going to need the lawmakers and your legal systems and your political systems. I mean, you can take a lot of things. We try to do risk of society. So risk is deep waters. You can put up. I should show you. I was in Hawaii, the Big Island of Hawaii. This isn't the very sign, but it just reminds me of a no diving sign on some cliff over on the south shore of Hawaii. And inevitably, what do people do when you put up a no diving sign? There are people jump. I didn't do it, but there are people jumping in and diving right and left. But maybe their sign gives them some sort of, hey, we put up a sign. If they don't follow the sign, not our responsibility. And that's kind of what we do as engineers sometimes. Oh, my slide got screwed up. Look at that. I put the or in there and it didn't come out right. Strange. I'll have to go back and fix that. So when we create specifications or even instructions on our plans and drawings, a lot of what we're doing is mitigating risk, or simple directions could be seen as a way to mitigate our risks. When we say contractor shall make all video recordings installed as part of the project, blah, 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 you can fill in whatever you're doing as an engineer. You are then putting the onus on, you're assigning that builder, that contractor, to do that work. If you use the word should, and this is just a little bonus for those of you who keep track of my time here. Careful using the word should. I know that I currently manage a group of geotechnical engineers, and the geotechnical engineers love putting the word should on a geotechnical report. They don't like using the word shall, because geotechnical is a little bit of mad science, and it usually deals in ranges. But when you get down to those structural drawings or civil drawings or traffic drawings or whatever drawings you are thinking about working on in your field later, you'll want to use shall, because if you ever use the word should, a builder or contractor would get those drawings and go, I should do it, but I don't think it's the best decision for the project, so I won't. And you have no basis to stand on as an engineer if you give that ability to. Now, there might be things where maybe you need to have a conversation with the contractor, but just write that in the notes. Contractor shall discuss with engineer prior to installation or something along those lines. Avoid the word should. Will is fine as well. Use shall or will. That was a bonus. Back to our risk mitigation. I'm going to fire through these pretty fast because I want to make sure you all have time to ask questions about the midterm if you have them. Okay, so LADWP, we completed our risk identification. We evaluated the risks. We came up with our 2 top big ones. We have quantified the risks and calculated risk costs. I think that's wrong. I think that's 3 million. I forgot to change that. We looked at the risk allocation and how we're going to mitigate that. Okay. So we can avoid it. LADWP can just, well, the only way you could avoid it at this point, if you're LADWP, is to you'd actually have to remove your underground structures and go to all overhead, or you just have to go out of business, because it's almost an unavoidable risk for LADWP at this point. You might want to put a big red X through this one. They can't avoid it. They have to either accept or control it. So how would they accept it? They can keep the vaults. They need to keep the vaults, but pay for the events if and when they happen. So that 3 million per year, they're just going to have to, if they just choose to do nothing, we're going to run it. We're going to just expect that 3 million year after year after year to keep going. They could control that risk. Now, maybe there's some engineering solutions with that. Here's one solution we did at Southern California Edison. We decided to let the gases be vented. We're going to say there is going to be an explosion. It's not ideal. Best case thing would be to remove those gases to stop the explosion. But if it happens, we've looked in this special manufactured cover that won't go flying. And we're not only going to do that, we're going to chain the whole thing down. We're not going to let those big chunks of pavement go flying. We're going to release it a little bit. Part of what probably happened on that LADWP one is that thing was bolted down hard, and it just, caused a lot of damage that could have, if there would have been a release system, it would have helped out greatly. I won't get too much into the technology of this. It's kind of that simple, but there's a lot more to it. Lots of calculations of pressure, lots of things going on there's additional, I don't know if there's additional risk. It doesn't fully solve the problem, but it certainly makes it a lot better. So let's look at a cost comparison. I think we've been through all this. Okay. Let's look at this real fast. And I took a look at just the vault thing here, but let's just say there was let's pick on solar here. That's one, the exploding vault is one part of, say, LADWP, but they got a lot of other issues. Don't if you're going to look at this from a company high level perspective, let's just pick on the solar companies. You're going to, I don't want anything to do with LADWP and their exploding manhole covers. I'm going solar. Okay, that's fine. Just be aware that there's risks with that too. Remember, everything you do in life has a risk. Every company faces risks. There's risks of putting solar on your roof. Your solar panels could cause your roof to burn down. It's there. It's true. Panels could stop working. It's going to cause you to replace them. If you have batteries connected to your solar, they might leak. That's a pretty big hazard. I know nesting birds can be a problem with so you get all these things. I just want you to be aware that every company is going to face risks. Think of LADWP as a whole. They've got, let's say we know about those exploding vaults, but they also have wind blowing down poles. We have downed power lines. We have wildfires. That one, if you'd have put that one on the list 5 years ago, people have been, what do you mean wildfires? That has become a huge risk, as you probably all know. Wildfires have put PG&E, our power company to the north, are into bankruptcy. They went bankrupt because of wildfires. water leaks, worker safety. These are just a few things that LAD, I don't know this for sure if this is their top 6 list of risks, but I'm just throwing some stuff out there. Maybe they went through and did a risk analysis of every one of these issues. We only looked at the exploding vaults and we said $3 million. What if their wildfire risk is $50 million and their down power lines are $12 million? They went into all this detail, had lots of resource, and maybe this sounds crazy to you, but I can tell you we do this at Southern California Edison. We have a large staff. I'm not on it. I'm working on the engineering part of it. But we have large staff that's doing nothing but looking at risk and things of this nature. Where should we spend our money as a company? Where do we face our highest risk? And it's not only the power company. Every company is going to do something like this. So obviously you look at this and it's like, okay, we've got 50 million for wildfires, and we only, perhaps the exploding vaults aren't quite as bad as we thought they were, at least on the company level. We've got 4 other things that are more serious. Workers say we got too many workers getting into accidents, causing serious safety concerns or injuries or worse. We've got wind blowing down poles and windstorms. We've got wildfires that put PG&E into bankruptcy. Huge deal that, you know, a lot of people had died in the fires up north, whether that's the power company's fault or not. That's a whole another issue. Messy deep waters there as well. So anyhow, let's just say we got this huge cost of, but LADWP only has $50 million to do this work. We can't do all this. How much can we focus on in this year? Now we only have $600,000 budgeted to us. How are we going to spend that money? We won't get 3 million. We won't be able to replace all those covers. We can only replace part of them. Which ones will we replace first? And that's something the companies will look at. Every organization of that company will take a look at this in relation to their budget and make decisions accordingly. Sorry, I know I'm flying through this really fast. I just want to leave room for well, that's it. Any questions on risk? I know I threw a lot at you in a short period of time. Silence. You guys are all now risk experts. It's a big, it is pretty straightforward. That said, it's a big deal for companies. I didn't make you risk experts in the period of 45 minutes, or neither did you by reading the textbook and doing this homework assignment. Don't feel like you're a risk expert. You probably touched the tip of the iceberg, but the tip of the iceberg is the fundamentals of it. And if you can just understand that part of risk, the other areas that it goes into is just really using better data, making decisions based on the data. And then things can get extremely elaborate with companies, but those are the fundamentals. If you get that, you know, you'll get it. And that's all I have on that. Let's turn over to it's not that one. Let's turn over to, where am I at? I think I did put the link up for, I think we have one of our classmates, Robert, has been busy recording these lectures. So I am trying to, if you guys are handling that on Discord, that's great. I will try also to post them on the Blackboard as well. So let us talk about the midterm 1 pre-read and exam. What I did was, if you go to the announcements, you will see the course link to the pre-reads and the info for the exam. So here's the info on the exam. It will be available a week from today at exactly 2:35 p.m. right after class, so that way you can focus on class. And it will be due on Friday. I believe Friday is the 24th. Let me double check that. Thursday. I take that back. It'll be due Thursday at midnight. So you'll have a span of 3 days to take whenever you like. You can take the midterm exam. It's going to be 100 points, 18 questions, 95 minutes long. You will have, it's going to be based off of lessons 1 through 3. Everything we've read, everything we've talked about in lectures, anything that's on the homeworks, everything we've done is fair game to ask questions on. It's going to be, there's your breakdown, true and false, essay, multiple answer, multiple choice. Of what you see there, I will have 6 questions, 41 points related to these 2 RFPs. A significant chunk, probably the heart and soul of weeks 1 through 3 is that lesson 2. If I had to say what's the most important of the 3 lessons, that would definitely be the one, because that's the one that's really going to carry over the most, is lesson 2, and what we discussed at the beginning of this class. I will certainly have a question or 2 on risk on there, but more importantly, the lesson 2 and part of the selection process is what I'm looking for. You're most focused on. So be sure to read through these requests for proposals. You know what to look for. I'm going to ask you, I read through the exam and made some changes to it. And I think this is the most fair exam that I've ever made in my life. At least I hope it is. I tried to ask fair questions. If you've done your reading and you know what's involved, it should be easy. My best strategy, advice for you on studying is be sure to read. When you read these proposals, you don't need to read them word for word like you would a novel. Just flip through them, get to know where things are at. You might want to look and go, well, what did he ask in the homework? Maybe he'll ask that question here. Maybe I should circle that and know what's looking for. You can take notes on it. You can do whatever. Come as prepared as you like by looking through those RFPs. That's it. The last thing on this is just for the sake, it should be common knowledge, but inevitably once in a while there are students I know that maybe come from different areas of the world, and maybe tests aren't always taken the same, but this is a exam, as every exam in this course will be, is taken by yourself. You can't collaborate with this. You can't have somebody be sharing anything in any communication method whatsoever. No texting, no typing, no calling on the phone, no working out together. It is by yourself. Your whatever online materials, your books, whatever you like, and Blackboard. So any questions on the midterm?
When you say essay, what's like the ideal length do you want those to be?
It's a good question. I did post. You will see that on. There is rubric. I didn't post it here, but once you get into the exam, I did post rubric on there. So I'm looking for. I'll just give you kind of a verbal of what the rubric is. Obviously, there's content. Did you answer the question? I will be looking that you cite sources. That's a big deal. If you just have it, well, my opinion is this or my opinion's that. It's nice that you have that opinion, and maybe your opinion is even the right answer. But I am looking for you to cite sources. Long story short, getting to your question is how long should it be? I would say as long as it needs to be. I would not think you need to go more than a paragraph. I'm not looking for you to write books. If you start writing books and going on for 2-3 paragraphs, I could say most of my questions are worthy of 2 to 5 sentences. Somewhere in that ballpark would be worthwhile. If you've got 20 sentences, I question whether I'll read it, but I'm guessing you're probably going to be overly redundant or just writing a lot of fluff, and writing fluff won't get you extra points. I'm really just looking for you to have the right answer. Were you able to explain it? Did you point me to a reference to show me that you understand what you're talking about? Any other questions? There is just a thought came to mind, multiple answer. I do allow for, multiple answers are always a little bit tougher than multiple choice. So I do allow partial. So if you get the right answer, you get points. But if you, say there's multiple answer and there's 6 options and 3 of them are the right answers and 3 are the wrong. If you do the right ones, you could go through and I'm going to select every one of them. well, then you're going to get docked for selecting the wrong one. So you can't fool the system that way. If you select, one right one or two right ones and there were three right ones and one wrong ones, then you'll get at least get partial credit. Multiple choice, you either get it or you don't. True or false, obviously, you either get it or you don't. Okay, if there are, I will just give another 10, 20 seconds of decompression. The moment I say that we're ending class, then it's like the questions come rolling in. I will, this is so starting Wednesday, Professor McKenna will be in class for the next 4 weeks, so I'm not going to be available. So if you have a question between now and it'd be nice if you had your question ready now. You'll have to send me an email. That would be the way to go about that. If you have a question I think it's pretty well spelled out, but like I said, for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be Professor McKenna. Okay. Well, good luck everybody on the exam. I know you'll do good if you paid attention and all those things. And no more questions. I will stop sharing and I will see you in a few weeks.
Thank you, Professor.
You got it. Have a good rest of your day.
Professor.
You got it. Yep. Bye-bye.